What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Mentality. I'm Elijah. If you just joined us, we're in a series called Identity 101, and this is episode 2, Who Told You Who You Are? Let's talk about the crisis of identity for a little bit. So when I think about the defining struggles of our generation, my mind naturally goes to obvious things, obvious candidates. It's the political polarization, left, right, Democrat, Republican, and the fractures that it's brought to families and friendships, and the financial pressures that keep people awake at night, that we're struggling to make ends meet. Or maybe it's the mental health epidemic that's seemingly touching every household in America and globally right now. These are real, genuine crisis, and I don't want to downplay any of that. I don't want to minimize any of that, but the more I've observed and listened and reflected on what's happening beneath the surface of our cultural moment, the more convinced I become that underneath all of these visible struggles lies something deeper and more foundational. We're living through a profound identity crisis, and it's affecting nearly every dimension of how we experience life. The particularly challenging thing about identity crisis is that they don't always announce themselves with obvious symptoms. They don't always look broken or dysfunctional on the outside. In fact, sometimes the most severe identity struggles are hidden behind the most impressive exterior. Sometimes an identity crisis is going to look like success, and sometimes it's going to look like ambition, discipline, productivity, work ethic. Sometimes it's going to present itself as a polished, curated social media presence, or a calendar packed with important meetings and commitments. It may even be a beautiful home in the right neighborhood, or a career that's skyrocketing and steadily climbing. Or maybe it's a lifestyle that appears not just functional, but genuinely impressive to everyone who is on the outside looking in at a distance. But if you could somehow peer beneath all of the polished exterior and see what's happening internally, you'd often find something quite different. You'd find that people are just exhausted. And it's not the kind of exhaustion that comes from a hard day's work and can be taken care of and remedied with a good night's sleep. But it goes deeper. It's more like an existential weariness that it doesn't matter how much rest you get at night, not how much sleep you get at night. It doesn't seem to touch it. And here's what's important to understand. This exhaustion isn't the result of laziness or a lack of motivation. In fact, it's often the opposite. Many of the most exhausted people I know are also the most driven and most accomplished and most outwardly successful. Their exhaustion is coming from having spent their entire lives trying to become somebody, trying to achieve enough, to accomplish enough, to prove enough, without ever pausing long enough to discover who they already are beneath all the striving and all the performance. And then inevitably they crash under the weight of it all. Then they recover just enough to start performing again, to get back on the wheel, to resume the exhausting cycle. There's no real time to breathe deeply and to reflect. There's no space to heal properly from the last crash. There's no margin to ask the deeper questions about whether this is really the life that we want to be living, or if we're just in survival mode day after day, week after week, year after year. And eventually something tragic happens to us all. It catches up with us. People become so accustomed to the wheel and so habituated to the constant motion and pressure that they begin to mistake mere survival for actual purpose. They confuse the adrenaline of constant striving with the satisfaction of meaningful living. And this, I believe, is a significant part of why we're seeing anxiety rates explode across every demographic. It's why burnout has become not just common, but almost expected in many professional fields. It's why depression continues to rise despite our unprecedented access to comfort and entertainment and material resources. The human soul was never designed to carry the crushing pressure of having to manufacture its own worth. We weren't built to live under the constant burden of proving that we deserve to exist, that we deserve to be loved, that we deserve to take up space in this world. And the insidious part of this whole dynamic is that many people don't even realize they're trapped in the cycle, because this mentality gets passed down generationally like an inheritance that we never even asked for. We say things like, my father lived this way, as if it settles the question in our mind, as you know, as it validates our understanding. My grandfather lived this way. This is just what men do. This is what it means to be a man, to be responsible, to be a provider, to be strong. And so generation after generation keeps handing down the baton of performance, and keeps handing down the baton of performance-based identity, passing along the unspoken rules. Keep producing, keep suppressing your emotions, keep grinding, keep proving yourself, keep the wheels spinning no matter what it costs, and keep going until your body finally gives out and you have no choice but to stop. And deep down, beneath all of the activity and beneath all of the achievement, we blame politics for dividing us. We blame economics for stressing us. We blame culture for confusing us. We blame social media for distorting our sense of reality. And while those things absolutely do contribute to the pressure that we're feeling, I think underneath all of them, many people fundamentally do not know who they are outside of their performance. They don't have a stable sense of self that exists independently of what they accomplish, what they produce, or how others perceive them. And if we're looking for something that has amplified this crisis to unprecedented levels, then we have to talk about social media. Now, before I go any further, let me just preface this. Let me say this clearly, that I don't think social media is inherently evil, or that it can't be used for good. It absolutely can be used for incredible things. I mean, look at what we're doing right now. We're having a conversation about our identity. We're experiencing the gospel through social media. We're being built up and encouraged. So it can be used for things for encouragement, for creativity, for building businesses, for maintaining connections across distances, for ministry, and spreading messages that genuinely help people. But we also have to be honest about the ways that it magnifies our existing insecurities and our identity struggles. Social media has given us the technological capacity to carefully construct and curate these versions of ourselves that we present to the world. We can create digital avatars that resemble us externally. They look like us. They use our names. They reference our actual lives while simultaneously hiding who we really are internally. We can show highlight reels while concealing the behind-the-scenes reality. We can project confidence while feeling insecure. We can project success while feeling like a failure. We can tell the world that we're absolutely incredibly happy while struggling with depression. And after a while of maintaining these curated personas, something disorienting begins to happen. You don't even know where the real you ends, the performance begins. The line between your authentic self-expression and strategic self-presentation becomes increasingly blurred. And that's exhausting in its own special, unique way, because now you're not just living your life, you're performing your life for an audience. And that audience is constantly watching. They're constantly judging, and they're constantly comparing. And that's the other major problem with social media, is the problem of comparison. You get caught in this trap. Comparison becomes essentially unavoidable. Even if you're not actively trying to compare yourself to others, the platform is designed in a way that makes comparison almost automatic. You're constantly exposed to carefully curated glimpses into other people's lives, and it's almost impossible to measure your behind-the-scenes reality against everyone else's highlight reel. You see their vacation photos and you compare them to your ordinary to you today. You see their highlighted fancy career and all of their announcements, and you compare them to your current job. You see their relationship status. You see all these posts about how they're living their life, and you compare them to your loneliness and your marital struggles. And comparison is dangerous because it trains you to believe that your value is fundamentally conditional. It teaches you that your worth depends on how you stack up against others in terms of success and in terms of appearance, attention, status, and influence and validation. So instead of developing into authentic human beings who know who they are and are comfortable in their own skin, we become marketable products. We shape ourselves into versions we think people are going to applaud. We want people to give us the hand clap, the versions of us that will get the likes and the comments and shares and followers. We learn to perform identity rather than inhabit identity. And for many people, especially for men, achievement itself becomes genuinely addictive. This is true because men are often taught from a young age to suppress emotional disconnect and inner turmoil through productivity and accomplishment. Feelings of inadequacy, fear, loneliness, or confusion aren't meant to be felt and processed. They're meant to be overcome through harder work and greater achievement. Suck it up, buttercup. Ain't that what we hear? We hear that all the time. Suck it up. Rub some dirt in it. Suppress it. Don't feel it. So we can spend 20 or 30 years working jobs that we don't even particularly, staying in careers that don't align with our deeper values or passions, simply because achievement provides temporary validation that feels like significant. You get the promotion, and for a moment it feels like you've proven something important. You get the plaque on the wall, the better parking spot, the corner office, the public recognition, the applause from your peers, and for a brief window of time, it genuinely feels like significance, like you matter, like you've finally arrived at a place of security and worth. But suppressed underneath all of that external success, the insecurity can still exist and it can be completely untouched. The achievement can coexist with a deep sense of inadequacy. The outward success can cause us to get to be hidden behind a mask of inward misery. Now think about that for a moment and let that sink in, because it's so different from our normal experience that it's almost hard to imagine. Humanity's original experience with God was not characterized by fear or distance or the sense that they had to earn their place in His presence. It was union, it was intimacy, it was communion. There was no striving, no anxiety about whether they were good enough, no exhausting effort to prove their worthiness. They were already loved before they accomplished anything. They were already accepted before they performed. They were already secure in their identity before they did anything to earn it. And that matters tremendously because it reveals something foundational about how identity was meant to function. Identity was originally meant to come from relationship, not from performance. It was meant to flow from secure belonging, not from achievement or accomplishment. And Adam just didn't wake up one day and he didn't wake up every morning with a to-do list with things that he needed to accomplish in order to earn God's love or secure his place in the garden. He lived from a place of already established belonging. He wasn't trying to become accepted. He was already accepted. His identity was already secure. His life flowed from that security rather than toward it. And then the serpent enters the story. And what's absolutely fascinating, if you read the text carefully, is that the serpent does not begin his attack by targeting behavior directly. He doesn't start by saying, go ahead and eat the fruit. He starts with a much more subtle approach than that. He begins by attacking their perception, by introducing doubt, by distorting how Adam and Eve understand God and themselves. He attacks identity before he attacks behavior, because he understands something crucial. If he can distort the way humanity sees themselves in God, if he can introduce suspicion and doubt into that relationship, then the behavioral transgression will follow naturally as a consequence. And honestly, that's still exactly the deception, how deception and temptation work today. The most effective lies are the ones that directly contradict obvious truth. The most effective lies are the ones that subtly distort perception, that introduce just enough doubt to make you question what you thought you knew, that make you suspicious of what you thought was secure. The serpent introduces this distortion with one deceptively simple question: did God really say? And in that moment, something enters into human consciousness that had never been there before: doubt. Suddenly, humanity begins questioning things that had previously been settled. They begin questioning God's goodness, God's intentions, God's trustworthiness. They begin questioning their own place in relationship, their own completeness, their own security, and their own belonging. The temptation that the serpent presents was never really just about fruit or about breaking a rule or the breaking a rule for the sake of rebellion. At its core, the temptation was the illusion that humanity lacked something, that they were somehow incomplete, that God was withholding something good from them, and that they needed, in order to be fully themselves, they needed to earn that. The serpent essentially said, you're not enough as you are. You're missing something. God knows this, and he's keeping it from you. But if you take matters into your own hands, if you grasp for what he's withholding, then you can become more than you currently are. And isn't that still the fundamental voice that so many people hear echoing in their minds today? You're not enough as you are. You need more. You have to prove yourself. You have to become someone greater, someone more impressive, someone more successful in order to really matter. You are what you achieve. You are what people think about you. You are what you accomplish. You are what you produce. It's the same ancient lie, just wearing different clothes, speaking in a contemporary accent, using modern vocabulary. And once Adam and Eve believed the lie, once they acted on it and ate the fruit, here comes shame. Shame immediately entered the human experience for the first time. And that's such a profound and significant shift that I don't think we can overstate its importance. Before the fall, their awareness and attention were centered around God. It was centered around God consciousness. Their sense of self was rooted in their relationship with God, in his perception of them, in the security of that union. And then after the fall, that God consciousness collapsed inward into self-consciousness. Now, for the first time, they become hyper-aware of themselves, their flaws, their nakedness, their vulnerability, their inadequacy, their insecurity. And what do? Immediately, in response to this new experience of shame, they hide. And that's what shame always produces, is hiding. Shame makes people feel unsafe being fully seen, fully known, fully exposed. So they cover themselves with fig leaves. They hide among the trees. They try to conceal what they fear will be rejected when it's fully visible. And if we're honest with ourselves, humanity has been hiding ever since that moment in the garden. The methods have changed. The fig leaves have been replaced with more sophisticated forms of concealment, but the fundamental dynamic remains the same. Some people hide behind ambition. Some people hide behind achievement, staying so busy and productive that they never have to slow down and feel their insecurity. Some people hide behind passivity and withdrawal, protecting themselves from potential rejection by never really putting themselves out there. And then some people hide behind addiction, using substances or behaviors to numb the pain of shame. Some hide behind arrogance and bravado, projecting an inflated sense of self and trying to compensate for deep feelings of inadequacy. Some hide behind religion, and I've seen this a lot in my lifetime, and moral performance, and I've been that guy, trying to earn their way back to the security they lost. And some hide behind carefully curated social media personas that show only what they want others to see. But underneath all of these different forms of hiding, underneath all these various strategies of concealment and self-protection, there's often the same fundamental fear. If people really knew me, if they really saw past the performance, past the image I project, past the version of myself I've learned to present, would I still be accepted, and would I still belong? And this separation mindset, this sense of being disconnected from secure belonging, becomes deeply rooted in human consciousness and gets passed down through generation. And here's what's important to understand. This separation isn't primarily because God abandoned humanity or withdrew his love. It's because humanity began perceiving themselves as separated. They no longer trusted the union they had with God. They no longer trusted their belovedness. They no longer trusted the communion that they had. The relationship was fractured, not because God moved away, but because humanity's perception of the relationship was distorted. Paul would tell us that we were alienated and separated in our own minds. And this is exactly why modern identity struggles mirror what happened in Eden so closely. The dynamics are the same. Comparison, striving, shame, performance, insecurity, the constant pressure to prove ourselves, the fear of being fully known, the exhausting work, image management. It's all the same fundamental cycle, just playing out in contemporary context. Now, instead of literal fig leaves, what are we hiding behind today? We're hiding behind Instagram filters, Snapchat filters, behind brand names and status symbols, behind professional titles, behind our platforms, behind constructed careers and identities. But internally, the condition is fundamentally the same as it was in the garden. We're terrified of exposure. We're terrified of inadequacy. We're terrified of rejection. We're terrified that if we're fully seen, we won't be fully loved. And the exhausting part of all this is that once identity becomes fractured in this way, once that secure sense of belovedness is lost, life becomes a constant draining attempt to repair our sense of worth through performance. We start trying to prove ourselves. We start trying to defend ourselves, to elevate ourselves, to reinvent ourselves, to compare ourselves, to market ourselves to the world, and we become our own project, our own product, constantly working to manufacture the worth that we fear we don't inherently possess. But here's the thing, I'm not asking what you would say if you believe, or what you would say you believe if someone asked you in a church service. I'm asking you what you practically believe. What your actual life reveals about your deepest convictions. Many people will say they believe they're loved by God while living in a way that suggests that they constantly have to earn the worth. Many people will affirm intellectually that their value isn't based on achievement while organizing their entire lives around pursuit of achievement and validation. And some people, if they're truly honest with themselves, would have to admit that they internally believe things like, I'm not enough as I am. I'm too broken for anyone to really love me. I have to constantly prove myself or people will see through me. Nobody would love the real me if they really knew me. My value comes from my success, what I accomplish. I'm only as good as my last achievement. If I'm not producing, I'm not valuable. then these lies, even when they don't consciously acknowledge them, quietly shape our decisions. They shape our relationships, our confidence, our behavior, our sense of self every single day. Everything in our lives flows downstream from our identity. That's why we have to start here at the source. Because you can try to change behaviors, you can try to develop better habits, you can try to be more disciplined or more productive. But if the underlying identity remains fractured and rooted in lies, those behavioral changes will either not stick or they'll simply become new forms of performance and striving. Performance-based identity will only work while you're producing, while you're succeeding, while you are achieving. But eventually, life shakes everything temporary. Eventually, you face a setback. You're going to face a failure, a loss, an injury, a change in circumstances that disrupts your ability to perform at the level you're accustomed to. And when that happens, if your identity is built on performance, it's going to collapse. Jesus said there's two types of people. There's one that built his house on a rock, and there's one that built his house on the sand. When the winds came, the floods came, the waters, sand washed away, and the only one that stood was the one built on a rock. That's why some people's going to spend their whole lives fortifying walls and building armor, creating impressive exteriors and projecting strength and success while secretly starving for acceptance and belonging. They're going to try to achieve enough to be enough, perform enough, accomplish enough, and heal wounds that achievement was never capable of healing in the first place. They're trying to solve an identity problem with performance, and it simply will not work. So, what does healing actually look like practically? Let me offer a few concrete starting points. Recognizing that this is a journey. And that's been a thing for me, that I'm on a journey, and it's not been a quick fix. And my identity transformation is taking time. And I got to be okay with that. And it often requires support from others. And first, you have to create space for honest self-examination. This means actually slowing down long enough to reflect, to journal, to write some stuff down, to pray, to talk to God, to sit with difficult questions instead of staying so busy that you never have to face them. Ask yourself, when do I feel most valuable? When do I feel most secure? When am I afraid that people will discover, or what am I afraid people will discover about me? What am I trying to prove? Who am I trying to impress? What would I lose if I stopped performing? And then secondly, you have to begin identifying and challenging the lies you've believed. This often requires help. It requires a good counselor, a spiritual director, a trusted mentor, a small group of people who know you well and can speak truth to you. When you notice thoughts like, I'm not enough, or I have to prove myself, you have to learn to pause and ask, is that actually true? Where did that message come from? Is that God's voice, or is that the voice of shame, fear, or past wounds? And thirdly, you have to begin practicing receiving rather than achieving. This is often the hardest part for people who have spent their whole lives performing. You have to learn to receive love. You got to learn to receive grace. You got to learn to receive affirmation, to receive rest without feeling like you have to earn it or pay it back. You have to practice simply being rather than constantly doing. This might mean learning to sit in silence without feeling guilty about not being productive. It might mean accepting a compliment without deflecting or minimizing it. It might mean letting someone serve you without feeling like you immediately have to reciprocate. And fourth, you have to begin surrounding yourself with people and environments that reinforce your true identity rather than your performance. And this might mean changing some relationships, or at least setting better boundaries. It might mean finding a church community that emphasizes grace and belovedness rather than just behavior and rule following. It might mean limiting time on social media or being more intentional about what voices you allow to speak into your life. And fifth, you have to practice speaking truth to yourself consistently. You got to do it every day, constantly. This isn't about positive thinking or self-help mantras. This is about learning to speak to yourself the way God speaks to you. It's about hearing what the Father is saying to you and applying that directly to your life. So when shame says to you, you're not enough, you have to learn to respond with, I'm loved and chosen and valued, not because of what I do, but because of who God says I am. When fear says to you, you have to prove yourself, you have to learn to respond with, my worth was established before I ever achieved anything. And maybe this is where I want to leave this conversation for now, with some fundamental truths that I hope will begin to sink deep into your heart and mind. That you are not your worst moment. You are not defined by your failure. You are not your addiction. You are not your insecurity. You are not your title or your role or your career. And you are not the voice that told you that you were unworthy or inadequate or too broken to be loved. Some of you spent your entire lives carrying identities that were formed in pain and trauma and rejection instead of in love and truth and secure belonging. And maybe for the first time, you're beginning to realize just how exhausting it's been trying to earn what was always meant to be received, trying to achieve what was always meant to be a gift, trying to prove what was already established before you ever did anything to deserve it. Because here's the truth that I want you to hear and really let it sink in to your being. You cannot consistently live beyond the identity you believe about yourself. Eventually, your life will flow from whatever you fundamentally believe you are. If you believe you're only valuable when you're achieving, you'll live in constant striving. If you believe you're fundamentally flawed and unlovable, you'll sabotage your relationships. If you believe you have to hide your true self to be accepted, you'll live in exhausting performance. And that's why identity matters so deeply and why it has to be the foundation of everything else, because behavior modification without identity transformation only creates temporary change at best. You might be able to white knuckle it, to force through it and make some behavioral changes for a season. And I've been there. I know how it feels to make the behavioral changes for a season and then you fall back into old patterns and yada, yada, yada. I get it. They're there. But those flow from your core beliefs about yourself. And when identity changes at the deepest level, when you begin to truly believe and live from your belovedness and your secure belonging in Christ, everything in your life flows from that. And that's when things start to change. The way you think changes because you're no longer constantly trying to prove yourself. The way you love changes because you're no longer loving from a place of emptiness and trying to get filled, but from a place of fullness that can genuinely give. The way you lead changes because you're no longer leading from insecurity and the need to control, but from security and the freedom to serve. The way you handle failure changes because failure no longer threatens your core identity. The way you approach God changes because you're no longer trying to earn His love, but learning to receive it. The way you approach yourself changes because you're no longer your own worst critic, but learning to extend to yourself the same grace God extends to you. And I really believe there are people listening right now, reading these words, who are genuinely tired of performing and pretending, tired of hiding behind carefully constructed images, tired of carrying shame that was never yours to carry, tired of trying to prove that you matter, that you're valuable, that you're worthy. Not because you're going to become perfect overnight. It's not going to happen. Not because you're not going to have everything figured out. Not because you'll never struggle again. If anybody tells you you'll never struggle again, it's a lie. But because identity has been restored in Christ, because the gospel offers you a way back to secure belovedness, back to communion, back to the kind of relationship with God where you no longer have to hide or perform or manufacture your own worth. And that's really what this entire journey is about. Learning to live from belovedness instead of fear, from communion instead of insecurity, from secure identity instead of anxious performance. That's the heart behind this series and behind the broader mentality project, because real transformation starts with clarity about who you actually are, grows through consistency in practicing that identity, and produces genuine confidence that isn't dependent on circumstances or achievement. If this episode spoke to something in you, if it touched you, if it touched on struggles you've been carrying or questions you've been asking, I want to encourage you to subscribe to the channel and share this with someone else who might be in the process of rebuilding their identity. And let me ask you this question to reflect on or share in the comments. What voice shaped your identity most growing up? What messages did you receive, either explicitly or implicitly, about who you were and what you were worth? I genuinely love to hear your thoughts and your stories, because I think there's tremendous power in recognizing we're not alone in these struggles, that many of us are on similar journey, discovering who we are, who we really are, beneath all of the performance and the striving. I'll see you in the next episode of Identity 101. Have a great day. I'll catch you later.